In our last episode, we saw how we can use Lambda Authorizer to protect our APIs. In this video, we will see how we can use AWS Cognito to protect our APIs. We will see how we can create and configure Cognito via the AWS console and then provision all these resources using CloudFormation within our serverless YAML file. So, without wasting much time, let's get started. So I am here on my AWS dashboard. In the services, we can select Cognito. So I don't have any Cognito instances running at this moment. So we will go ahead and create the user pool. So once you create the user pool, you have various steps that you need to configure. The first step is configuring the sign-in experience. So here we will keep the provider type as the Cognito user pool for now. If you need to know more about the federated identity providers, let me know in the comment section and we will create a video on a federated identity providers like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, etc. Okay, so let's go ahead with Cognito user pool. And in the Cognito user pool option, we can select what are the attributes that we need for the users to sign up, etc. Okay, so for now we will select email. All right, so once you select the email, click on next. So here we need to create some kind of a password policy and we will keep it to defaults. If you have some policies in mind, then you can go ahead with the custom policy and you can define exactly what should be the requirement. Coming down, we have an option here for multi-factor authentication. Ideally, you would enforce MFA for having more security in place, but since we are just trying this out, I will go ahead with no MFA. Okay, rest of the things about self account recovery, delivery method for recovery messages, I'll just leave it to default. You can look at the different options and see and select whatever is relevant for your need. So when you go next, there is an option to configure your sign up experience. So should we allow self registration? You can enable this. Whether we need to verify the accounts, etc. All these options you can select. For now, I will keep them as a default. Coming down, there is a required attribute that are needed when a user is created, right? So here we could ask for some kind of a additional attributes that we want when the user signs up. So let's say I want to know the given name of the user. So you can select it. In the custom attributes, you could add some more attributes if you need, but for now I will keep it blank. Next, we can select how we want the message delivery to be, especially when we send out emails. The recommended way is using email via Amazon SES. So if we select this option, then we need to have an SES instance. We need to configure the from verify our email, etc. In the interest of time, I have no issues sending out emails via the Cognito's default. I'll select send email with Cognito. Okay, so if you see the from email address is no reply at the rate verificationemail.com in this case. But if you had selected send email with SES, you could configure what should be the email from, the reply to, and all those attributes in the SES flow. Next, we need to give a user pool name. This is important. So for now, I will just create something known as task pool demo. Okay. And going ahead, I want to use the Cognito hosted UI. So you can select that option. You can also configure the Cognito domain. So I will give it as task API task auth demo. Okay. I can keep it as public client. Let's give a client name, task client. Can generate the secret later. We need to also provide the callback URI. So for now, we don't have any API server setup, or we don't have any UI developed. So for now, I will just give localhost 3000 here. But see that we don't have anything yet. Okay, so in the advanced app client settings, we can select what should be the flows. We keep it same. We don't change anything. In the Auauth to grant types, there are various grants. I would select the implicit grant. In the authorization code grant, what will happen is you will get a client code, and then you need to make an additional API to get details about the user using that code. But in the implicit grant, you will be provided with the ID token, access token, refresh token, etc. And it will contain all the user details in the JWT, and you can decode it to get those information. Okay, so rest all things I'll keep it as is. I'll click on next and go ahead with create user pool. So once the user pool is created, you can click on the user pool. Here you will see various options where you can create users, groups, and it has the other details that we have configured here. Okay. I create a new user. Let me give some name. Let's say durgadas@mailinator.com. I'll mark this email as verified. I can set a password, let's say some password here, and I click on create user. Okay, once we have this user created, we can try to log in with this user. Okay, now to try this out, what we need to do is we need to take in the domain that we had configured, which we can see in the app integration. So this was the domain. What we need to do is we need to create the link. In order for the sign up link, it should be the domain. You need to append /login, and in the then you need to have some query parameter. Response type should be token, and the redirect URI is redirect URL should be the one that we had configured, that is localhost colon 3000, and the third parameter should be the client ID. Now from where do we get this client ID? In order to get the client ID, you need to go into the app integration, and when you come below, there is this client that we created, task client. So copy this client ID and paste it. Enter that. It says an error occurred with the requested page. Okay, it should be redirect URI and not redirect URL. My bad. Press enter. An error occurred with the requested page. So this means that there is some problem with the way we have configured our user pool. So let us deep dive and see what is wrong. Okay, So we go to the sign-in experience. Sign-in experience, we had Cognito user pool, we had no MFA, we had no device tracking. In the sign-up experience, we had all these options. This seems to be good. Under messaging, message template, app integration, don't have much info here. Let's click on the client. We edit it. We have all this option. Change any. This seems to be good. This is the callback URI, implicit grant, and hosted UI status is enabled. Okay, we can click on view hosted UI. Okay, we do have here client ID, response type, and everything. All right, so let's sign in with the password what we had set, mailinator.com. Okay, click on sign in. It forces us to use a new password. And the given name. If you remember, when we configured, we said that once the sign up experience is done, we also need the user to provide their given name. Okay, so we put in the given name and click on send. All right, now if you see here, it has signed in, and in the URL, you see ID token. We can copy this into a file. Okay, so let me do that. If you see this URL has a ID token. It will have an access token, refresh token, and bearer. So what I will do is I'll just split this up so that we can see it. This is the access token. Okay, the ID token is here. Okay, so ID token is what we will be using. If we use this ID token and go to jwt.io, and we paste our token here, we see that it is signed using RS-256 algorithm. Okay, the issuer is the Cognito. This is the Cognito username. Okay, and the email that we had used to log in. Okay, so these are the fields that we have here. Okay, so this is how we can use Cognito. So what we will do is we will use this Cognito with our serverless frameworks, API gateway, and APIs that we have configured. So for that, what I will do is I'll just go ahead and delete this user pool. Okay, it says that we cannot delete the user pool because we need to first delete the user domains. So we'll go inside, we'll click on the app integration, and we will delete this domain. Okay, once the domain is deleted, we should be able to delete the pool. All right, so now we don't have anything, we don't have the user pool. So we need to create this using CloudFormation. So what we will do is search in for Cognito CloudFormation. Okay, so open the CloudFormation documentation for Cognito, and as you can see here, within the AWS Cognito, we have identity pool, attachment, user pool. So basically, as part of the experience that we saw. We need to create a user pool. We need to create the user pool client, and we need to create the user pool domain. Okay. So what we will do is we will go ahead and start with Cognito user pool. Okay. So in the Cognito user pool, you see that we have a lot of options, right? We have a lot of options. So we can only select those that makes actually sense for us, right? And which is required. So basically, if you look at the properties, none of these are required. Everything required is no. But we would definitely want to have a good name to our user pool. So what we will do is we will use few stuff from here. One thing is there should be something known as user pool name. So we will use this user pool name, which is string. And then there are username attributes, which we can use to be email. So if you see in the username attributes, it can be the possible values are either phone number or email. Okay. So what we will do is let's open our code. We will go to resources and create a new file called cognito.yml, and here we will give a logical name, and that logical name could be something like Cognito user pool. And within this we saw that there are two things, type and properties. Okay. So if you go on top, the type is AWS colon Cognito user pool. So we use this, and at the same time we saw that in the properties it has two properties. One is the user pool name, which was a string. We would want to name it as task user pool along with the stage, right? We have already seen this in our previous videos. So we want to refer to the stage which is in the serverless self file, right? That is within the provider and stage. So self colon provider dot stage. So this will name our user pool as task user pool hyphen dev hyphen live and so on. The other option that we saw was user name attributes, right? And within this we just want to use email. Okay, so with this we have Cognito user pool ready. The next thing that we saw was Cognito user pool client. Okay, and in this client we have a lot of options that we need to check out. Okay, one thing is we need to reference the user pool ID within our user pool client. Okay, so for that we will need to refer to the intrinsic functions that are available in the user pool. So if we go down and see the return values, it has ref, which gives this ID. Okay, and this is nothing but this the user pool ID. Also, if we need to get some more information like provider name, etc., then we can look at the get att. Okay, so what we will do is let's look at the user pool client. Okay, so what does the user pool client need? It needs user pool ID. Okay, we will need to have the client name. Need to supply the callback URLs. You remember we put localhost colon 3000. We also need to mention the supported identity providers along with the OAuth flow, the allowed OAuth flows. Okay, so if you see the allowed OAuth flows, the option is, there is an implicit option, code and client credentials. Okay, so we had used implicit, so we will configure it to be implicit. And at the same time, we also saw supported identity providers. The option is Cognito, Facebook, Google, sign in and login with Amazon. We had kept default, which was Cognito. So we will select Cognito. Okay, so, and what does this return as a output? The ref, that is the intrinsic function ref, gives you the user pool client ID. Great. Okay, so let us go ahead and copy this type and properties. Go to our serverless YAML and we will create something known as Cognito user pool client. Yes, this is the logical name. Type is Cognito user pool client and it has properties. So within properties, we saw that it needs user pool ID, and this user pool ID should be the ID of the user pool that was created as part of this configuration, right? And we saw we can use an intrinsic function ref, and if we give this Cognito user pool the logical name, the output would be the user pool ID. Next is the client name. This is up to us. We will name it as let's say web client, and we will attach this stage to the client name so that it can work across environments. The other options that we saw was allowed OAuth flows user pool client, and this should be true. Okay, so basically what we are trying to do here is trying to replicate all those configurations that we did manually, right? Similarly, allowed OAuth scopes, we had kept this as whatever was their default, and the values for that was email, profile and OpenID. The next important is supported identity providers, and this value was capital Cognito. Allowed auth, allowed OAuth flows. We had used implicit here, which would give you the ID token, access token, etc. So we will use implicit. Okay. Callback URLs. At the moment, just have this localhost colon 3000. Okay, and I think that should be it. There is another one. You could also have a default. You redirect URLs. So if you don't specify, it will redirect to this. Okay, great. And the last thing that we need to configure is the domain. Okay, so we go to user pool domain, and as you can see, the user pool domain just takes in a domain config. This is if you are using a custom domain. If not, we just need to provide our domain prefix and the user pool ID. So we'll just copy this out. And here we will go and create our Cognito domain. So we will call it Cognito user pool domain. I will paste it. Okay, we don't need custom domain config because we are not using any custom domain. This domain should be our prefix. Let's call it task auth idp hyphen self dot self colon provider dot stage, and user pool id is the same one that we used, the output of this. So we can copy this and paste it here. Great. So with this, I think we should be good with our Cognito resource creation. We can go ahead and check this out. So we will do Sls Deploy. So let's see if this creates all these resources correctly. Okay, so let's give it some time for it to complete. Till then, I will pause this video. Okay, so the Sls deploy command is successful. So what we will do is we will go and check if this all resources were created. Okay, so I go back to my user pools in Cognito. I will refresh it. Okay. Oh, all right. So it did not create anything. My bad. That is because we have defined our cognito.yml here, right? But we haven't referenced this properties into a serverless YAML file. Hence, serverless YAML doesn't know what resources to create. So what we will do is we will go under the resources section and we will create and reference. So basically we will reference our resources to the one in the cognito.yml file. So we have Cognito user pool. Okay, we have the Cognito user pool client and we have the Cognito user pool domain. Okay, so we will use this similar structure. Instead of task table here, we need to refer to the cognito.yml and the resource name was Cognito user pool. So I'll copy this. I'll paste this in both the places and change the logical name so that it is referencing correctly. Now we can give sls deploy command and this should basically create the resources as needed. So this will take a minute or so. Until then, I will pause this video. Okay, so the SLS deploy has completed. So let us go and check the resources that's been created. So I will refresh the Cognito and as we can see, we have task user pool dev. Okay, there are no users in it. Sign in experience is all default. If you go to app integration, we see the domain as we configured. So we will copy this domain. Okay. And what we will do is there is a web client dev. So everything seems to be good here. So what we will do is we will check this out. So we will copy the domain and we saw some time back that we need to use this domain and then we need to provide something known as the login along with response type equal to token and redirect underscore URI this should be the one that we have configured as the callback, and we need to provide the client ID. The client ID was client ID within the web client. Okay, so we select that, we add it to this URI, we copy, and we hit it. So what we will do is, let's go and open it up. Okay, so we have a sign in with your email and password, etc. So either we could sign up. Okay, can click on sign up, we can create a new user, let's say verinator.com, and we can put in some password. Click on sign up. Okay, there was an error with the requested page. Okay, so why is this? So let us go ahead and check this out. So we go back to the user pools. Let's look into the users. There was no users created. Oh, there is. Okay, so let's use this user. Let's confirm this account. Okay, so this seems to be good. So what we will do is we will check this out. We'll go to the app domain, resource server, hosted UI configurations. We'll click on the web client. Let's see if everything is good. Let's click on view hosted UI. So let's use that same user. When we do sign in, okay, it works. All right, so you see here we have a ID token, etc. Okay, what we will do is we will paste this up in our we will do a word wrap. Okay, so we have the ID token, we have this ID token, this is the access token. Okay, and these are the expire. All right, okay, so this seems to be working, so that is nice. So let us go ahead and configure our Lambda functions to use the Cognito authentication. Okay, so at the same time what we will do is we will click on this and say copy link so that we have the URL, okay, for our test. Okay, so we'll paste this up. All right, so we have this URI. Good. What we will do next is let's go to our serverless YAML file and we will define the authorizer, that is the Cognito authorizer. So we go to our authorizer section. We had a token auth that we had registered as in episode 3. So now we will register our new authorizer, which we will call as JWT Cognito Authorizer. So since we are using the JWT token authorizer, the attributes are different. So the type is JWT. We need to give the identity source that is similar to what we were using here. So I can copy and paste this out. Okay. Then it has audience. Audience is nothing but the client ID. Okay, now the client ID is something that we can get from the Cognito user pool client. Okay, so what we will do is in our serverless YAML, we'll define something called custom. Okay, this is our own, just so that we have everything at one places. And here we will define Cognito user pool ID and Cognito user pool client. So this will be something that we will be using too often. So we know that user pool ID we can get from the intrinsic function. Okay, and both of this can be from intrinsic function, one from the user pool and other from the user pool client. Okay, so let's use this into our identity source. So we'll go to the authorizers. The audience is nothing but self custom dot Cognito user pool client. Okay, the next thing is the issuer URL. Now this is important. The issuer URL should be, it has a form. Okay, the issuer URL, the form is, it should be HTTPS, it is Cognito IDP. So this is something which is common. Okay, so it's basically, if you want to use, you need to use it in this way. It is Cognito -IDP, along with it is the region, it has a region. Okay, dot Amazon aws.com slash the user pool ID. Okay, so we need to construct this. So in order to construct, what we can do is we can use something known as a join function. Okay, so join, it is an array. So what we say is to blank empty, we concatenate the following. Okay, so this should be under your array. So the first thing we saw that it should be Cognito -IDP dot. The second part is the region. So region we can take from opt, region, or we can take it from provider dot region. Okay, so the next part is dot Amazon aws.com, and the last part is the user pool ID, right, that we can get from self custom dot we had used, right, we can Cognito user pool ID. Okay, so me, so two brackets. Okay, so that's all with respect to the issuer URL. So this should be good basically. Okay, Cognito IDP region Amazon, this. Okay, great. So the last part is we need to go to our function. Okay, and we need to reference that authorizer, right? At this moment we had all create tasks, get tasks, update task using the same authorizer, right? That is the token auth. So instead what we will do is we will use the Cognito authorizer for the create task. Okay, so what we will do is the get task will still use the token auth. Ideally all of them should be same, but for now since we are testing different types of authorizers, I'll keep the get task to be token authorizer and the create task will be the Cognito one. Okay, so I take this name, the logical name for the Cognito authorizer that we defined, and under create task authorizer, I use that one. Once it is done, we can issue Sls Deploy command. Okay, so let's wait for this Sls Deploy to complete. And once it is completed, what we will do is we will go back to our REST method. We will try out the send request for get tasks, which uses the token auth. And then we'll try to create a request that is for task, create task. We will use the token auth, which should fail because now we have configured it to be the Cognito as a authorization layer. Okay, and then we will use the ID token that we received as part of the login and provide this in the authorization header. Okay, so let's try this out. Now the deploy is complete. So I go back to my HTTP client. I do a send request on get task. This should work as before because we haven't changed anything there, and we see we have 3 items that are returned. The create task was configured to be Cognito. If I do a send request on create task, it should fail. And as we can see, it is failing. And if we look at the www authenticate header in the response, it says that token contains an invalid number of segments. That's because we have configured it to be JWT, and the JWT has a certain format, right, which consists of 3 segments within it, which is not provided. So what we will do is we'll force create task to use the ID token. So what I will do is I'll just create a JWT variable here, and I'll take the value of the ID token and I'll paste it. Okay, and this JWT variable, the value I'll pass in the authorization header. Okay, I'll create values 6. I'll say task created as part of Cognito. Okay, and I'll do a send request. As you can see, it has worked, right? And we see a request being successful with the response of ID 6. If we had malformed this JWT a bit, just for trial, what I'll do is I'll just change this J to K. Now the JWT is incorrect. If we do a send request, it should basically fail because this JWT token should not be verified or validated against the Cognito. And all of this is done automatically for us by this authorizer segment that we added here. So let's try this out. So we have given a malformed JWT. I do a send request, and as we can see, it says 401 unauthorized. So it is saying that invalid token, no kit provided in the JWT. It's basically because we have changed it. So let's say I change it back to the original, and let's say in between I change something now here, right? So instead of L, I'll make it K, and if I do a send request, but this was for the get, so I make a send request, and you see it has failed, right? It says RSA verification error because we have changed something in the data and that isn't getting validated. Okay, so what we have seen here is using Cognito for protecting our APIs. So we created all the necessary resources needed for Cognito Authorizer via the CloudFormation. We then defined it, declared it, and then we hooked it up to our Lambda function within the serverless YAML file. So that's all I wanted to share as part of this episode. If you haven't shared or liked this video or haven't subscribed to my channel, then please do so that you get notified for all the videos that I publish as part of this segment. I will see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning.